Welcome to the Feminist Exec, the podcast where women in leadership share their stories, challenges, and triumphs. I'm your host, KP, and together we'll dive into the real talk behind breaking barriers, leading with impact, and redefining success on our own terms. Get ready to be inspired, empowered, and equipped to take your leadership to the next level. This is the Feminist Exec. Let's forge your future. Welcome to the Feminist Exec podcast. Today we have with us Kristi Hemmer. Kristi is an educator, an author, a speaker, and a founder. She's founded her own company, the Academy for Women's Empowerment, which is a school to put more women in power. She's published her own book, Quit Being So Good, Stories of an Unapologetic Woman, on International Women's Day. And she's traveled to over 77 countries solo, including the Strait of Magellan, which is quite off the beaten path. Kristi is here to talk today about her Moxie mission, putting more women in power, and we're going to have an amazing conversation. Welcome, Kristi.
Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity and for you to have the Moxie yourself to be a feminist exec. I mean, that takes Moxie in itself. So thank you for your work.
Well, first off, you brought it up. One of your signatures is Moxie. What does that mean to you, and where does that come from?
So Moxie actually technically means like guts, pluck, et sassafras. For me, it means being your best self for the best of the world, however that is. It can be something small. It can be something large. Sometimes it gets very intimidating. I just had a Moxie circle Thursday night, and they're like, has to be a big thing. And to me, it doesn't. To me, it's that little thing. For example, running is hard for me, but it's not the running that's the Moxie. To me, the Moxie is putting on my jog bra because that signals I'm going to run. And so that little bit of putting intentionally on my jog bra is Moxie. That knows I'm going to run. How it came about was my Leadership Academy women. We graduated in 2006. In 2013, I had the idea. I did a workshop, and it was so empowering for women. I'm like, there's something here. So I gathered them together. I said, hey, come meet me. And we met in St. Louis, and a couple of my friends, and they didn't know what I was doing. One flew in from DC, one took the Amtrak from Chicago, two other lived in St. Louis, and they said, you need to call your business Moxie Boutique. And I was like, I'm not selling goods. However, I wish I would have taken that word Moxie back in 2013 and put that in. It did turn into Academy for Women's Empowerment, but that's how the word Moxie came about. They're both of my friends that looked out this big dictionary are very much a linguist, and I didn't know what that word meant until then.
I love that. It's now become kind of your signature. Every time we talk, you're like, what's your Moxie moment?
Yeah.
I think that's such a powerful thing to think about. Like, what's something that you've done with pluck or guts recently? It's so awesome.
Yeah. And then, of course, all my taglines, Moxie on. And I love it mirrors back to me. And as a counselor, I realize if someone's mirroring your language, they're connecting. And that makes me very excited that people connect with it.
I love that. So at 8 years old, you declared you'd be president, you'd start your own school, write a book like Judy Blume, one of my favorite childhood authors as well, travel the world like Magellan. So how have these childhood dreams influenced your career path so far?
You know, it's really interesting. I'm an early childhood educator. That's where I started, was early childhood and elementary education. And when I work with women in individual coaching and they get stuck, I'll say, what did you love to do when you were younger? Whether, regardless if that's 6 or 5 or 8, 4, whatever that means for you as a little girl, 12. And for me, I love it because to me, I feel like I'm in the right path. That 8-year-old girl, I have Academy for Women's Empowerment. I am president of my own company. I have been on the Strait of Magellan. It's very, very hard. And I did a very, very little bit. And it's very, very scary. And you know, like I want it to be in the card catalog. Probably not going to happen unless I create my own card catalog, but I will get my book to Judy Blume one day. So for me, I feel like I'm really aligned with that little girl, and I'm really, very happy. And I love what I do every day. So it's hard. It's very hard. And I love that she had that hard mission for me even back then. And so I would think, and I'd encourage all of you who are listening to go back to when you were a little girl or a little boy or a little self and think about what did you love to do?
It's so powerful. And going back to one thing that you said, which is you're in alignment with what you want to do, which leads me to my next question is, you were an educator, you had a 6-figure job in Tokyo, and then you decided to embark on a journey to found the Academy for Women's Empowerment. Tell me a little bit more about why you made that decision and how that made more sense to align with what you're doing now.
Well, and I was in education for 20 years. I was a teacher, counselor, principal, I was a coach, I was a faculty development specialist, I was a substitute teacher. And for me, when I turned 40, I went to apply for, I thought it was the school, and I went to apply for a different school, was starting to work on the cover letter and realized, you know what, it's not only the school that I'm at or the environment, which was part of it, definitely. I don't want to be in education anymore. And those years I was in that place, I would see the shrinking of the girls. And so to me, it took that year off and said, what do you do when you turn 40? And I said, give myself the last continent, which was Antarctica. So I took a year off and traveled on $20 a day, not in Antarctica though, for a year, and traveled through, landed in Quito, Ecuador, crossed all the way down to Ushuaia, took a cruise boat to Antarctica. And then along the way, living on those $20 a day, I met Janie, who is a social entrepreneur in Nicaragua. In that 1 year turned to 4 years. And as I met her, realized the power of social business. Doing good is good for business. And it's transformative to me.
So not many people, I think, are familiar with the term social entrepreneur. What does that mean to you? What should people know about social entrepreneurship?
Well, I appreciate you asking about that, because social entrepreneur means something different to me than it may to others. And what I love about language is don't let it get stuck. Don't let it stick who you are. If you don't like the word Moxie, use a different word that means guts. If you think it's too big, or if you want to use grit, whatever. So don't get stuck on the words. And for example, to me, social entrepreneur, I go with the Ashoka definition, which I think has actually even pivoted a little bit, which means you are working in your own country. Otherwise, it's philanthropy, because how am I supposed to know what really is happening unless I'm in my own country? And you are a for-profit company. So you're not a nonprofit. You're not getting money donated to you. You're generating revenue yourself. And you're using a business model, which we know makes money and sustainable in our country. And you're solving a social problem. So my social question or problem is, why do women and girls shrink? Why are we not safe? Why are we not in power? And then I created the business to answer the question and solve the problem. So I am a public benefit corporation. So in the state of Minnesota does acknowledge public benefit corporations. I think there's probably 40 states now that does. There's no tax benefit or anything. I just have to report every year my impact. You can go to Secretary of State and find that out, and find out all the other companies that are public benefit corporation, which is great. And now, if those of you who want to do a bigger dive, I'll just mention one other thing. I'm not going to go into it because it's a lot. There's a B stamp, a B Corp stamp, and that's a private certification. I think it's in Pennsylvania. Kind of like a LEED, LEED stamp for buildings. When you walk into a building, you know it's been certified by a private company. B stamp or B Corp is a higher level. It is not only so hard to get into, but to sustain it. And I'll give out one example. I bank at Sunrise Banks here in Minnesota. They are a B Corp. And when I talked to them about it more, they told me it takes 2 full-time people to make sure they are continuing to have that. And a lot of companies that I used to follow or used to buy from are no longer B Corps. Either they've been acquired by somebody who doesn't want to live to that standard, or it was just too much to do for them. So for me, any company you see, so knowing that you are buying from a company that has a triple bottom line, people, health, and environment, if it's a triple bottom line. Mine's double, and mine is people and health, like looking at the wellness piece.
That's awesome. It's so cool that you have an impact and that you can actually measure the impact of what you're doing. So the question that you've been asking is, why do women and girls shrink in certain situations? I know you have written your book. You cover a little bit of that in your book. And of course, your academy covers that. Maybe what are some of the high level things that women and girls shrink back from, and when do they start doing that?
Yeah, actually the research shows 6 years old. When I talk about it in my book, it says 8 or 9, that's when confidence peaks. And actually it's interesting because my dream was when I was 8. Right. And so that's what I go back to. There's research that girls start separating from their dreams at 6. And actually the Moxie circle I was in on Thursday, one of the women is an auntie of a 4-year-old. And she's like, I'm seeing my niece saying, you can't wear that color. That's a boy's color. Or you can't do that. You're a girl. Oh, you're putting on makeup so you look pretty.
She's 4.
Look pretty. She's 4.
Wow.
She is, and so she was freaking out. Her sister was freaking out, going, "What's happening?" And, one thing was, one of the early childhood things was, maybe there's gender discovery, right? You're playing with gender and you're just diving deep as a 4-year-old looking at gender. But the other thing is, there is the research that 6 years old is when girls start separating from their dream. And actually, Barbie has done projects for many years before even the movie, of trying to bridge that gap, at the dream gap. And then I would say another important age is 12, 13, 14 is when girls start dropping out of their lives. And I can speak to that, I dropped out of Future Problem Solvers of America because I was told, boys aren't going to like you. You're too smart. I mean, if you look, what 12-year-old, 13, 14-year-old needs to be thinking about that, right? But we're expected to. I see it still. It's even more with social media. So to me, as an educator, as a counselor, it's even more alarming, because those are your identity years. Eric and his wife, she doesn't get credit for it, but they both together came up with the social emotional stages, and that's your identity years. I tell young girls when I work with them, hey, do this identity work now, or I'll see you when you're 20 or 30 or 40, coaching. And so that's what's even more alarming to me. And I put that in my book too, that's really, really scary. And the cool thing is, though, now is I am still a future problem solver of the world now, as a social business, so as a social entrepreneur.
So it's come full circle. I think it's kind of really fascinating. So you said, between the ages of like 12, 13, 14, those are the identity years. Those are the years you really start to, like, for girls, we start to remove ourselves from certain things, even though we had dreams maybe when we were as young as 6. And then you said they come back at 20, 30, even maybe 40 in your case, when you made your career shift.
I mean, actually, they end up in my office because they have no identity.
They have no identity. And so they have to go through a whole rediscovery process, right? Wow. I think that's really interesting, because then that means that there's this opportunity. And you said this earlier, when you turned 40, you looked at your career differently. You had kind of a second stage career, if you will. And so many women and so many people, I think, are stuck into this is my career forever. I can't pivot. I can't go back to school. I can't do this. What are some of the examples maybe that you've coached people of that second career that you've learned that, you have this whole life and you can make the decision to rediscover yourself and do something better?
Yeah, I think one is entrepreneurship. Women make great entrepreneurs. And it's really interesting. Those who are attracted to me and my work are change makers. So my advisory team says, oh, they're high potential women. I'm like, no, change makers, because not all high potential women are change makers, and are not all understand the impact of women empowering women.
What's the difference between high potential and change makers?
I mean, someone can be a high potential and look like it on stage, or they can look like it. Like, if you look at their resume, they've done all the things, right? But a change maker to me is somebody who is going to take what they have and make a difference in the world, and not just doing certain things, but looking at outside themselves and making it a powerful change in the world too, in the system. And not all of them understand. I've had a couple who I've heard that are CEOs of companies that have said, I've never been discriminated against. And this was a woman who was single and married to a woman. And I'm like, yes, you have. There's no way you haven't. And that message out there then makes all the women in the audience thinking, I must be wrong then. This can't be true. And I've heard a lot of different messages come through. Like, people will say, oh, I've heard this person say this. And I'm like, oh my goodness. I know that can't be true. I just know it can't be true because of everything I've seen and done, and just navigating life. So for me, that second career, or that second stage, is really pausing to think about, again, that little girl, of what you wanted to do. And I think also listening to those messages you heard when you were younger. Like, I was always told by my guy friends, Hemmer, you'd be a great entrepreneur. And I'm like, I don't want to have my own business. That sounds horrible. Like, why would I want to be in charge of other people? I never thought of having my own. And of course, then I was a principal in charge of 25 faculty and 224 girls, and then all their parents, right? However, as a business owner, I'm a solopreneur. So I don't have a huge company. And a lot of times people want me to scale, do it, train the trainer, which I would love. But I don't want to be responsible for the product that comes out of that. I'm not a mother for a reason. I don't want to caretake all the stuff that has my name on it, or that I've created, or more important than my name, or is more like the quality of the service that's going to happen. So that to me is a big part.
It sounds like, though, that you've tapped into this level of freedom with solopreneurship, and that's allowed you to do things like travel to 77 countries. So I want to dig into a little bit of that because I know that's a huge part of your life and your life
Mhm.
experience. What experiences have most significantly maybe shift your perspectives on women's empowerment? And I know there's going to be listeners out there that want to know how you survived on $20 a day in all these countries.
So how I survived on $20 a day, it's very ugly. No one really wants to do it. So, what had happened was came back, I did a Habitat for Humanity build, which I've done about 20 in my life. And I came back from one in Thailand in 2005 after the Boxing Day tsunami. And we were one of the first civil responders to go in and helping those that were impacted by the tsunami to rebuild. And I came back, and this guy I was seeing, we had coffee, and he's like, you look different. You're like, I mean, yes, I had lost like probably 8 pounds in those 2 weeks too. But he's like, you look different. He's like, you're glowing. He's like, what is it? And I'm like, yeah, I knew the job I was in was not a good fit for me. And so he's like, Kristi, really? Again, listening to others, right? If you just went to Bangkok or Thailand, how much would it cost you a day to live? And so I was like, okay, $7 a night. Now this was 2005, although I'd say, I mean, it's changed a little bit, but not a whole lot. 2005, $7 for accommodation. I needed probably $5 for food and drink. I added probably an extra $2 to, in case I wanted a Starbucks drink or beer and fries. And then I had to add $1 or $2 on for internet because you had to pay for internet then. You had internet cafes, and then a couple dollars for transportation, kind of thing internally. Obviously, I didn't count my flights there and back. So that part wasn't the 20, but living in that $20 a day was really where it was. It turned out to be about $20 a day. And so I started subconsciously, I checked out from the library how to live on half of what you're living now and not feel the difference. And I just started making my own tweaks and looking at what I spent the most money on. Target was one. And I was like, okay, I had a $20. And when I was
Guilty.
yeah, and I wasn't happy with my life, so I just would go there, and I mean, I'd get all the little T-shirts, all the things at the counter. So I just gave myself a $20 limit at Target, and when I got to the counter, I'd be like, okay, would figure it out before I went to the cashier. I spent a lot of money on gas and realized, oh, I'm just driving everywhere rather than being smart about it. I cut my golf membership, which didn't really matter because all my friends golfed at the country club, so I was always their guest, and they really liked me there. So like, Kristi, we know you're not a member. Just come. Just come. We'll be okay. But I always came with somebody else who also was a member. So I figured out how to do that. And that's how the $20 a day came about. And I still, now it's like $35 or $50, or like when I'm in
Yeah.
Aruba, I look at like $50 a day, and I can still live on, $50 to $75 a day in Aruba if I'm very planful. So to me, it's just being more intentional about your money and how you spend it, as well as your headspace, how you spend it.
And what are some of those experiences that have shifted your perspective on women's empowerment? I know we were talking a little while ago and you were saying, are you empowered because you travel or are you travel because you're empowered? And I think there's a key difference there, right? Tell me a little bit more about how you think about the travel and the experiences relating to women.
Yeah, it's really fun because I'm working on a TED Talk right now, and that's my thing was everyone always thinks, well, the reason you're able to travel is because you're an empowered woman. Like, how'd you become an empowered woman? And I really think back to it, and I think I'm really an empowered woman because I've traveled. All the things, like I can negotiate everything. Even I was at a coaches symposium, and this woman's like, "You're a great salesperson." I'm like, "Yep." I always get hired. People always want to hire me for sales, but I'm like, "Nope, only for those things that I'm really passionate about." But I've really learned to negotiate. And my partner, he's always embarrassed because I'm like, "Okay, what if I did this and this? Can I do this?" And I'm always negotiating everything. Everything's a negotiation for me. And so, I mean, there's great. I mean, listening, knowing, and the joy of being wrong. That comes from travel. When I'm wrong, I laugh oftentimes. Sometimes it's painful to be wrong. So, but I'm like, oh yeah. So to me, there's so many lessons in travel that's made me empowered and made me powerful. So that to me is the idea of being empowered because I travel. And then one other thing that I'm going to talk about too in my TED Talk, everyone always asks me, where's your favorite place to be? You've been to 77 countries, you've traveled for 30 years, you lived out of a backpack for 4 years. Like, where's your favorite place? And for me, my favorite place is wherever I am right now. That's my favorite place because of the experience of traveling and being empowered, and then knowing how to make the most of my day, really being intentional of connecting with people and looking and pausing and listening. All those things are so important when you travel, especially when I'm the typical American and I speak one language well. I have enough Spanish conversational to get by when I'm traveling if my friends aren't talking for me. And I have enough Indonesian that they smile and they're kinder to me, living in Indonesia. And then when I land in a country, I do learn to say, hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, sorry, excuse me, thank you. And also, that's bad, or something like that. So if I have an interaction with a guy, that I can say it to him in a voice that lets him know, that just kind of makes him pause. And that gives me enough space to do what I need to do. But also it just causes them to pause too. And they're most likely not going to follow through whatever they were going to do, because they just, they had it in their head and then like, oh, it just kind of broke that moment.
I think that's such a really important point, because traveling as a solo woman, safety and everything is probably a huge concern, especially for other women and girls, and knowing how to get out of bad situations. So that's a great tip, is learning some of the basic words in the language that you're going to, and that's bad phrase. That's going to be really helpful, I think, for a lot of people.
Yeah. And again, it just gives you that pause. It disrupts them. It disrupts the moment, and it gives you pause. It gives them pause. And then I guess as I'm talking to you about this, so thank you for that, you've shifted the power.
That's really important. Shifting that power from them to back to you, and
Yeah.
letting them know that that's not something that you're going to stand for.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
so many women get caught off guard and deer in the
Yes.
headlights. You don't know what to do. You don't know how to speak up. You stay quiet. So that's so important. I love
And
that.
I think, yeah, thank you. And I think the other part of that too is, one person asked me, like, how do you prepare for a talk, or how do you prepare, you get in front of thousands of people, how do you prepare? And it was a great question, because I had to stop and think about it. And it goes back to just this part is, I visualize and I think about what I would do. And in those situations, but even like for today, preparing for today, I'm like visualizing success. If success was really successful for you, for me, and for the listeners, what would that look like? What would that feel like? And what would that sound like? And then so I take a moment, came downstairs and got ready ahead of time to think about and to really do that. And I do the same thing for positive and for sometimes negative, or prepare myself.
So that leads to the next question around challenging decisions or challenging situations, right? How do you prepare yourself? How do you address a challenging decision? I know you've had some as a leader, and we've had, I think, things in the world between COVID and Me Too and affirmative action and DEI and all the things that are happening, particularly in your space, and our space around women empowerment. So how do you address those challenges, and maybe a little bit more about a challenging decision that you've had to make?
I think a challenging decision you have to make as a small business every day is, do I stay in business or do I do something else? And, for me, that's what I love about the work I do. Whenever I'm at a moment where I'm like, well, maybe I pivot a little bit and do this or that. And even like my partner and I were golfing yesterday, and he's like, I could see you being at a golf course. I'm like, I love that, except I'd have to go other different places, right? But what it is then I get a text or an email about how my book saved their life or changed their life. And I'm always like, tell me more about that. Great saying. If you ever need something to say when you're done what to say, tell me more about that. It gives
Tell
you
me more
pause.
about that.
It's an amazing saying. And it's amazing. Like, my book did save a life. Like, I had this woman who's like, yeah, my friend, I gave it to her, and she was in a very abusive relationship, and she read the book. She read the stat that I said, that's not me, it's the research. So it takes 7 times for a woman to leave a relationship, an abusive relationship, permanently.
Wow.
And she had left 4 times, and she's like, I'm going to break that stat. I'm not going back to him. And she still hasn't, because of that stat, my book, right? So it's really amazing how that's what keeps me going. But the decision to keep being in business is a decision, like all my friends who are small businesses, we go with every single day. And I think even like after the administration change and the election, my advisory team in December said, Kristi, as Academy for Women's Empowerment, how are you going to survive? But also not survive, but how are you going to continue to empower? Like, how are you going to be in this space? And so my solution was, they always want me to be like this big person. That's not, it could be me one day if that happens, but I'm not going to go out and plan that way. And so I go back to Margaret Mead. Never doubt the power of a small group to change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. And so that's why I gather small groups of women, like the Moxie Circle at where I live. And I did another Moxie Circle for another group. I'm doing a trip to Montana with a small group of women. And so for me, that's one way of navigating, is bringing people together. One of my new favorite quotes is, wherever women gather together, failure is impossible. Susan B. Anthony. I know, Susan B. Anthony, right? So to me, that's what I'm like, okay, that's what I do. I gather women together when I'm not sure, or when I feel like don't know what I'm going to do, or it's really hard. I'm like, okay, great. I have a really great group of women I golf with, and I'll just message them and be like, hey, when are we going to do it? Or I'll go golfing with them, or we'll do a social event together. And that, other groups of women. But also, I go back to the power of social entrepreneurship, which is turning your challenges into opportunities. And when I do that, magic happens.
Mm. It's interesting because it reminds me of Michelle Obama's book, which is her second one. And she talks about the power of community and the power of relying on your small community. So you don't have to reach the masses, which is everybody thinks about being famous or number of followers or number of this, but your focus and impact is really on those smaller groups and those one-on-one conversations and really getting to know someone and helping them through their challenges. I think that's, something I think that goes untalked about quite often, is like the definition of success doesn't always have to be the big stage and the millions of followers, but you can really have an impact with one book or one conversation.
Yeah.
I think that's amazing.
For example, like I went golfing with this woman, and it was our first time golfing, and she's like, oh, I think I can connect you. She's like, it sounds like I should connect you with our ERG, our Employee Resource Group. I'm like, great. So I followed up with her, and she's like, oh, the timing's not right. I'm like, okay. So every once in a while she'd say, hey, timing's not right. Or I would say, okay, whatever, that kind of thing. And then one day she calls me up and says, hey, you inspired me not only to be involved in the ERG, but now I'm co-leading the ERG. And I'd love for you to submit a proposal for our International Women's Day. And I'm like, okay, great. And then I did. And the committee felt like my proposal was the one that fit the best. And we had 1,000 people show up online around the world and 14 watch parties. And that doesn't even include like all the other impact that comes next. And so now that she's going out and saying, when we're golfing or we're other places, like, oh, you all need to hear Kristi's message, so for her, even though kind of the idea of sponsorship, she heard what I was talking about, got interested, pushed herself. Like she said, I thought about like, what would Kristi do? She said, hey, can I become more involved in leadership? And she's an amazing leader. So it's great that she's in that spot, but it's really fun to have those connections just multiply when even that one-on-one can multiply.
Yeah.
Really quickly.
As you're leading women and coaching women and they're walking you through their challenges and things, what are some of the most common challenges that you are coaching women through now?
Being overlooked. It kind of goes with the research. They look at productivity instead of potential. For men are hired based on potential versus productivity. Women are hired on productivity versus potential. And you can see the huge gap, but also the huge problem. How can you be judged on productivity if you've never done it?
Right.
So it's, and then of course that goes back into the whole patriarchy theme of women are the caretakers, or the responsible ones, the work. So for me, it's that they don't see their potential, or they don't communicate their potential. And I would say on the flip side of that, women aren't clear about their potential, or aren't clear of what they want to do. They're
interesting.
Clear of what. So it's harder to coach someone or to help someone if they're not very clear about what they want. And I do think that's part of the system too, that we've been told to be small. So it's hard to come up with our potential when we've been taught our whole lives to shrink, to be small. And that even going back to like Cinderella, there is nothing in the story of Cinderella. And I've taught all the many different versions of Cinderella in my career, that everything is done to her or for her. I mean, mouse has more power over her destiny. Bibbidi Bobbidi Boo has more power over her destiny than she does. There's nothing in the entire story. And if someone finds something, please tell me, because I'm a learner and I love to know. But there's nothing in the entire story that she has agency over. Everything is done to her or for her.
I think that's such a powerful insight, because then that goes back to your conversation at the beginning where you were saying all these women are coming back in their 20s, 30s, 40s saying, I don't know who I am. Well, how can you communicate your potential to your employer or your future employer if you don't know who you are and what you want because you gave up your dreams when you were 6 years old or started to shrink yourself when you were 12, 13, 14. I think that's such a powerful insight for people to kind of think about is how can you advocate for something that you don't know about? You have to really know yourself in order to advocate for yourself.
Yeah, know yourself and have a great group of people around you, and women and men, because like for me, my guy friends in high school said, "You're an entrepreneur." If they had said you have an entrepreneurial mindset, I would have been like, "Oh yeah, 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 for sure." But again, the community sees you this way, and they see you, and so to really listen to what they say.
You write a lot about the difference between sponsor and mentor. And you just said your friends, having an impact and telling you what to do. I think one of the ways that women can help move each other forward in the workspace is not just what happens when you're in the room, but what happens when you're not in the room. And how do you address that? So tell us a little bit more about what you think about the difference between a sponsor and a mentor, and how do you go about finding one?
I think a mentor is really like kind of one way. As a counselor, I'd say it's a kind of it's very hierarchical. It's like if I say to somebody like, "Can you help me?" And then they give me a book or they give me a TED Talk, or they're like, "Oh, did you know about this website?" Or here's this person's email or their LinkedIn. Okay, I could do that myself, but there is potential, there is value in mentorship, that idea of giving advice, giving their own experience, that one-way transaction. Whereas for me as a systems person from my counseling experience, I love sponsorship. Sponsorship is, not only back and forth, but I think it's a community. Like when I invest in a woman or man, the way I do it is I know that it may come back to me, but it'll go into the world for sure. And that's for me, like that whole community. I think of like a win-win-win. I love Stephen Covey's work with win-win, and I had a third win on. My sister's a millennial, so she's always like, "What's the win for me first?" So like, "What's the win for you? What's the win for me? And then what's the win for the collective?" is how I look at it. And so sponsorship is that. That was the workshop I did on the power of sponsorship. When you have that sponsorship mindset, what I love about it is you can start changing right now, and not changing who you are, but being different than more of who you are, like whatever you love to do to sponsor more of that. And so to me, that's where the research shows that women are 3 times over mentored and at least 46% under sponsored compared to men.
Really?
Yes. And that's one reason why I learned to play golf was I didn't want decisions to be made on the golf course without me. And it's crazy. That's what's so fun about that one example I gave. It was made on a golf course. That connection was made on a golf course, right? So it doesn't mean everyone has to go play golf. I know there's articles about like that, but finding that space where you're naturally going to connect with other people. But sponsors continues to multiply. And I think one reason that there's risk in sponsorship. And I think some women, we've been taught that we don't want our name attached to something that fails. We've been taught, don't fail, don't fail, don't fail. Even in my chapter, Don't Let Girls Quit. We've been protected from failure, and we've been, we don't let women fail, and we don't want women to fail, because if women fail, then the whole, that kind of thing. So for me, that's sponsorship takes risk. And like when I tell people, you're going to make some sponsorship investments that are not going to work, and that are going to be painful, and that might look bad for you. However, if you truly are who you are, it won't matter. In fact, it'll just only multiply you because you took this risk and it didn't work, and then you pivot.
So, for someone that's, let's say, mid stage of their career, that's looking, I was literally texted by a friend this week, "Hey, I need a mentor. I need somebody that's outside of my industry because my industry's so small." Maybe the advice to her would be go find a sponsor, maybe not necessarily a mentor, maybe somebody that you can collaborate with and you can sponsor each other. I think that's becoming more powerful in the workplace when you have two women that are advocates for each other, because there's not always someone at the top that can kind of say, "Hey, this person should be promoted," but it's, "Hey, I'm partnering with this other woman. I'm going to sponsor her. I'm going to bring her up. I'm going to bring her into the conversation." And then by virtue of both of us being in the conversation, it brings people up, right? That could be a way for people to think about, maybe it's not just that over mentoring anymore. We shift the paradigm a little bit.
Most definitely. And it's really easy to do once you're intentional about it. I would say right now that you probably have a mentor that's really a sponsor, and to really let them be aware of that and have conversations about that. As well as the other research is women are penalized when they talk about themselves. And whereas if another woman talks about me or a man talks about me, both of us are elevated. So an example of that is I was at a symposium, and I was sharing a table with another woman. And I did really well that day because she talked about me and I talked about her. So I will say they came and talked to me about my book, and she's a new company. And I would say, hey, did you know? I'd really love for you to talk to my friend right here because she has this new business and I suspect it's going to be able to help you. And don't you want to be first? And so they would go over there immediately. And then just like if someone came over, like I was talking to someone else along the market, and she came over and got me and brought this other woman to me and said, hey, she really needs to be on your list. And then there was this person who was in charge of, I mean, he was like the perfect person for what she was selling and what she was in her impact. And we were both staring him down to come back over to the table because he had come and talked to me already and she wasn't there. And he didn't catch on to that we were staring him down. So he walked away and she's like, oh, maybe he'll circle back. And I was like, he's not going to circle back in my head. So I got up, I went over there and I said, hey, and she's like, oh, you're at this table too? I'm like, oh, no, I'm not. But I said, remind me of your name. And he told me, and I said, I really think that you really need to come over with me and, talk to my friend. I think really where your pain point is, she has the solution. And so he did. And then he told her after he had a conversation, took all these notes and they connected. He's like, you need to buy your friend a beer. There was a happy hour afterwards, and we didn't, whatever. But it was like the idea of us talking about each other was very, and we didn't know each other before then. Like we had one conversation. I'd never met her in person. We only had, and I just said, hey, you want to share this table? She's like, yep. And we did. And so it's always about how do you bring up other women? And, sometimes everyone's like, oh, you need to do social media more, Kristi. And I'm like, you need to do social media more and tag me because I've never gotten business from my own posts, ever. But I have gotten business when other women and men tag me.
That's such a powerful thought, is that it's the referral. It's somebody's gonna, listen to someone else more than you can market yourself all day long, right? And everybody's gonna be like, oh, they're just marketing or promoting themselves.
There's Kristi Hemmer again.
Yeah. Versus somebody saying, hey, I really think you should listen to this or watch this TED Talk or something like that.
Yeah.
So leveraging your small community, your network of people is such a great tip, especially for entrepreneurs to grow their business.
Well, and I think it's education too, because the research does show that. And when I have one-on-ones with women, one week I had 2 women separately say, oh, I do that. I go through on LinkedIn and go, there she is again. Not me specifically, but there she is again. There she is again. She was like, I'll think of it differently now, And so it's that idea of once you know better, like Maya Angelou says, do the best you can till you know better. When you know better, do better. And that's a big part of it. And again, I don't like the research and I'm not going to buy into it, but until it changes, I'm not going to pretend it doesn't exist. I always say, women are like, I don't want to play the game. And I'm like, I would say play your own game until you can change the rules. And my example is when I played basketball in junior high in 7th and 8th grade in Iowa. At that time when I played basketball, I was like 3rd seed. So I became a really good cheerleader. So then I became a cheerleader because I wasn't very good at basketball. It was half court back 82, whatever that was, because the belief was that women did not have the stamina to play full
court
basketball. So I was defense. I got to the middle line, never crossed that line, threw the ball over. Okay, one generation later, we have Caitlin Clark. And the reason I bring up Caitlin Clark is because she's an Iowa girl. She is like dominating and bringing other women along with her. So she's created this thing. And that was one generation that we totally changed the rules. In fact, are making our own rules. They're spending more money. Now women are getting paid and they're looking at women's sports. We're out doing all those different, she and basketball and all the other women who are aligning and not dividing. We are uniting and not dividing. And we're not letting the media divide us. Caitlin will say, hey, Angel is a good friend of mine, and they'll tag each other. Taylor Swift and Beyonce will show up to each other's launch of their documentaries. Media wants to divide women. It works in the system. And these women have the moxie to not only say it, but then show up for each other. And when they get on the court, Caitlin and Angel will greet each other. That's, to me, is an important part of it too.
So do you think then that this whole, I would say, trope of women being mean to each other and having to be rivals and there not being enough space for 2 successful or 3 or 4, do you think that's a product of the environment, like media pitting each other? What do you think that is? And how can we change the perception that women are mean to each other or there has to be only room for one dominant woman?
In my early childhood education, I learned that you can only control the environment, not the person. And so I use that a lot. And that's true of a 3-year-old. That's obvious, right? When you have a 3-year-old and they're like in a store, in church, or on a plane, I'm always like, okay, Kristi, the environment's the plane and we're not able to change that. So we're not going to, those things, but you can change some of the environment in a plane too. But so to me, it's about the environment. And like my best job and my worst job, my favorite job and my most stressful job was the same boss, but different schools. And so to
Interesting.
me, yeah, and to me, that's what it is. It's not women are mean to each other. Men are mean to each other. Women are mean to each other. People are mean to each other. We see it on the playground, right? But to me, it's not the person, it's the environment. So you can take that same person and put them in a different playground or a different job, and they will be the best supporter. But if you have an unsafe environment, which now we talk about psychological safety and some of the culture talk around companies, then you won't have that. The competition will be, how can we as a company be the best company there is, rather than how can I be the best person, or how can I not get fired? But when you're in an unsafe, and the second environment I was in, we were told to keep secrets. And then the
Really?
person telling us to keep secrets would break the secrets, or people would break them. So when you're in an environment that's not safe, then your survival instincts come out. So to me, if you're feeling that you have to be competitive, and I don't mean because I'm a competitive person, but I'm competitive with myself. I'm competitive with the impact. I'm competitive with, I don't say like, oh, I want to be better than like a Brené Brown. I'm like, oh, how can I emulate her? Like, what is she doing well? And how is that similar to me? How can I like grow her and then learn from her and all those different things, rather than how can I knock her down?
Mm,
I mean, the world would be so much worse if Brené Brown was knocked down. Like, she's amazing. She does amazing
100%.
work, right? So to me, like, my competition kicks in and thinks, how can we be more like this? And so if you can think from that, rather than me, independent thinking, go to interdependent thinking, we thinking. And women are natural at that when we're in safe environments. So if you're feeling like very toxic, what can you change with your environment?
I love that. I think that's so key. I've noticed that with communicating, especially in corporate environments, which I'm often in, using the we instead of the I for women in particular is powerful. Where you say we have decided or we've discussed, it gets a million miles further than I've decided and I've thought about this or something like that. Maybe it's just something that is in corporate a lot, but the power of we, I think, really does bring women up and elevate us to that level where we have that authority to make that decision.
Yes, and also be aware that you're not taking away your credit too. There's kind of the idea of the double bind. There's such a fine line for women. We need to speak from we and not take credit for things. And we need to also figure out, how do people know what our impact was, what individually we did as well, so that others aren't taking credit for our work. Again, going back to when we talk about ourselves, we're penalized. So we really are in a tough double bind. And so to me, everyone's like, how do you break the double bind? And I'm like, in education and awareness, and calling it out and saying, hey, we as a group did this. And I do want you to know that I helped with this, and this, and maybe educating about double bind, whatever that works for you. But in your head, at least know, how am I breaking the double bind within the system?
And one way we could do that too is say, we did this. And by the way, this particular woman did this really impactful part of this project, and helping each other. I
And
love
I
that.
did this. And also, like,
Yeah.
women will say, how do I think the other thing is, the research shows, until you get to that tipping point, that, significant 30%, it's going to probably be an unsafe environment for women. When they say 30%, that's when you have that mass, a tipping point where there's actually a lot of power in 30%. So if you have a boardroom of 10, that's 3 women on the board, right? But when you get to that, you have more of a safer environment, because you are going to speak up for each other. And I think it goes back to my book where I talk about, be first. So be the first woman to speak up, but even more importantly, be the first follower. When someone says something and you agree with it, and they're sitting there and they're getting looks, and people are, be that first follower and say, I agree. I was on a panel, and this woman said, I'm going to say something that might be controversial to some of you. And she said it, and I could see the crowd was all mainly women. They're like, oh, she just said that. And I said, I know what you mean. And then I heard a couple claps. And so to me, I was like, Kristi, this is my moment to be the first follower. What she said was hard, but it was true. We all knew it was true. And she said it. And so instead of her looking bad for saying it, I was like, and I know what you mean.
Yeah.
And all I had to say, and I mean, I even heard some claps, because that's what we all knew. But we were all like, we're supposed to be good. We're supposed to be nice. What she said wasn't nice, wasn't kind, but it was true, right? It was kind. It wasn't nice maybe, but it was true and it was kind. So
Well,
yeah.
and it gives people permission to have the space to have the difficult conversations. And one of the things that I know you talk about as well is that as an early childhood educator, people have said to you, you'd be such a good mom. And you like to say that you're an even better aunt, an
Mhm.
aunt to many. Tell it that's often a controversial take, being
Mhm.
child free intentionally. What are some of the things that you think about being child free and being the aunt to many?
Yeah, I love being an auntie. It's my favorite role. And I'm an auntie to so many people. And as an educator, especially when you have a classroom of students, it's very obvious love is needed everywhere. And I have my Love Heal shirt on, which is one of my very favorite social businesses. Thistle Farms, Becca Stevens, look her up. She's in Nashville. She's amazing work with women trafficked and prostituted and addiction. But to me, being an auntie is like magical. It's one, you get to do all the fun stuff and then be like, bye-bye. But then also those that I'm really aunties to, that my sister-in-laws will say, hey, we're having a little trouble with this. Can you help reinforce it? And of course, when I say it, it's yes, Kristi, you're right. That's amazing. When the mom says it, oh, so I always say it's like kind of the golden card, and I always make sure I work within the families too, because I know that kind of like the teacher too. When I was a teacher, and they're like, "Oh, Miss Hemmer said this, Miss Hemmer said this," and I'd have mom say, "Yeah, I hear about Miss Hemmer all the time, and I just said the same thing, but it's Miss Hemmer this and Miss Hemmer that, Miss Hemmer this." So the power of auntie is super powerful. And I remember I had one person say, I don't think I'd tell people that you don't want children as an educator. I don't think parents would want children in your classroom or in your school. I think I was a principal at the time. I said, well, think of it this way. When your child shows up, in my school or in my classroom, who do I think about all the time? Your child. When someone who has children, who do you think they're thinking about all day? Their own children. So I think you really do want those women and men who don't have children, because they're going to only be thinking about your child in the classroom, not their own, as far as that goes. And then she was like, interesting. So yeah, it's been definitely an interesting choice, especially navigating a little bit about I don't ever want to get married. And so navigating being single as well, especially if you go state to state. In Texas, you have common law marriage. And I have friends who were with somebody, and when they decided to break up, it was common law marriage. And he stuck it to her like a divorce, even though they never got married. And there's certain things that you have to really be aware of. And in Minnesota, my partner and I, we have a cohabitation agreement. We have a will together. And really a lot of gay rights really protect single females, because it's domestic partners.
Interesting.
And I would also say too, like the word partner too, like universally in most countries like the United States, partner is a very universal form of word, not just associated with somebody who identifies LGBTQ.
Yeah, that's such a powerful insight as far as like inclusive language. One for the partner is
Yeah.
if you use that word, you don't necessarily put somebody in a box. Like if I refer to my spouse as my spouse or my partner, people don't necessarily know where I am versus if I say my husband. But I think one of the things is when you recognize early on in your life whether you want children, whether you don't want children, it's okay to be an auntie and be able to provide all the learnings and everything that you have. It doesn't mean that you're barren and cold. You said something at the very beginning of the episode where you were talking about your trip and you came back and you were glowing. And that's often something that people are like, "Oh, are you expecting?" Like that's the immediate response. And in your case, you were, creating a new career, a new life
Mhm.
path, and that created the same kind of glow that doesn't have to always be associated with procreation, which is
Yeah,
such a
great.
different way to think about it.
And then of course too, I'm always supportive of those women who want to have children and
Absolutely.
want to change their name, whatever that is. To me, it's always about choosing versus being chosen. Women that I work with are change makers, and they're chosen a lot for things. To me, it's about you choosing what you want and being intentional about it. And in our golf group, we have one of our group members is getting married, and they're talking about children and all that. And it's so fun to be part of that conversation and to be part of that. And so to me, it's like knowing whatever your choice is, really be your choice. I had a friend, she's a fierce feminist, and she's like, I never wanted to get married and have kids, but she goes, I got on the trolley and didn't get off. And she's like, I love my husband and I love my daughter, but it's not what I wanted. And she goes, I look at your life and want to be you. She's like, but I suppose you look at me and want to be me sometimes. And I'm like, nope, don't.
So looking back on your career so far, and
Mm-hmm.
everything that you've done, knowing that probably the best years are still in front of you, is there anything that you would have done differently? And, maybe close out with some of a significant lesson that maybe you learned from that thing that you would have done differently.
Done differently. There's probably only one thing, because where I am right now is all those different challenges and all those different decisions. So, and I really love where I am right now, and I have loved, and even in those stages where I loved being a teacher. I loved being a counselor. I loved traveling. So there wasn't, and when I didn't, I pivoted. But I think if I was look back now, I think one thing I would have done was gone to a women college. I was really a great student. I would have been a great candidate for it. And I grew up, I was first generation really college student. So, my dad's like, I went to the Army, your grandpa went to the Army is good enough for you. And I either would have done really well or I would have been kicked out. One of the two, right, with the Army. I applied to one college, obviously got in, blah, blah, blah. And so I think for me, it would have been, especially like Wellesley. And that probably goes back to community again, is the community. All those years I was a feminist that didn't know I was a feminist, all those years that I didn't fit in anywhere, I could, navigate it and do enough of it that I could fit in enough. But to me, that's probably the only decision. I could say I could have chosen different. The one school that I went to was very toxic. I had 2 other job offers that were really amazing. And I went with the safe one. The one that I knew the boss. I thought, well, why not, rather than the other 2? But again, if I hadn't done that, then I wouldn't have taken the year off, which then led to the 4 years off, which led to me. So all those different things. So that's probably the one thing.
What is one of the most significant lessons that you've learned in your leadership experience?
Yeah, I like this question a lot, because it's not only my leadership experience, but it's my travel experience. It's everything about me is to listen.
And would that be your advice to young women or people in the middle of their careers listening to this podcast to listen? What would be your last piece of advice?
Listen to where you can fit in and belong, and then act on it. Have that Moxie. Like I had a woman at the Moxie circle. She's like, I was thinking, do I apply for this job? Do I not apply for this job? It's bigger than this. And then she's like, I read your book and I'm applying for the jobs. And she has 3 interviews next week. I think so. Acting in your Moxie zone. And then I think the third thing would be is you're not supposed to do this alone. You're not. Bring other women, bring other men, bring change makers, whatever connects with you. Bring other people in. We are here to help you and to support you. And we also expect you to help and support us too. It's not age-wise, doesn't matter to me. So to me, that's the 3 things I would say is listening, figuring out kind of like when is the right time? When should I do this? What is out there? Acting on it, have the Moxie to do it, and then not doing it alone.
And if people want to read your book or learn more about you, where can they go to find you?
Yeah, KristiHemmer.com. So that's a Moxie moment to have the guts to put my name as a website. I've really fought it. But then when everyone is like, but that's your name and that's your book and that's what you do. And so, but that's where you can find the book, but also you can find it on Amazon too, or I believe in other, I'm reprinting the book for the 3rd time. So there'll be more opportunities to buy it too in some of the other other presses too. I'm looking at like Bookshop and things like that too. So, and
that's a Moxie moment right there. 3rd printing of your book, right?
Yeah, it is. I was told like that's actually pretty rare that even like professional books, if they don't sell 2,000, they don't do another reprint. So they said 90% of authors who get it publishing don't sell more than 2,000. Yeah, so I'll be up to 5,000.
Wow, that's amazing.
With your help, with everybody's help.
Of course, we'll all bring each other up, right?
Yes, of course.
I love this. This has been a fascinating, inspiring conversation with Kristi. Any final words? But thank you so much for joining the Feminist Exec.
Yeah, the final words, of course, would be Moxie on. Don't change who you are, be more of who you are.
Love that. That's a wrap on this episode of the Feminist Exec. Thank you for tuning in and being part of the conversation. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. A special thank you to our composer, Peter Legault, for the original music. I'm KP, and this is the Feminist Exec. Until next time, keep leading, keep rising, and keep forging your future.